Good evening, everybody. We have huge news that should be dominating all of the headlines in corporate media, but you're unlikely to hear much about it in the state-controlled media. Quote, the United States in recent weeks has been secretly shipping ATACMs, that's a long-range missiles, to Ukraine, according to Reuters. These are uh, uh, tactical missile systems, Army tactical missile systems. Suffice to say, you can't give long range missiles to a corrupt, undemocratic, non NATO member that can be used to strike targets deep inside a nuclear armed nation like Russia. And this is more Biden regime foreign policy madness. Biden's betrayal of the American people continues in the United States Senate. The Senate just gave away another $95 billion of taxpayer money to Ukraine, to Israel and Taiwan, 60 billion of that going to non-NATO ally Ukraine, which has never done anything for the American people, that is, ever. And by the way, anyone would think Ukraine was situated somewhere between South and North Carolina rather than between Russia and Belarus and Poland and Romania and a number of other countries. And the Senate also passed the so-called TikTok ban, which would force the Chinese-owned social media platform to divest to American ownership. Now, no one should overlook that the Biden regime is hardly better than the Chinese communists when it comes to running a totalitarian dictatorship, when it comes to media censorship. So all Americans should be extremely suspect of what's going on with this TikTok ban, because the ultimate goal of our own Marxist Dem politicians is total media control. And oh, yes, you can bet our surveillance state will have a big role in the TikTok that emerges from new American management. And the Wall Street vultures, by the way, are circling already, circling the former gutless Speaker of the House as well. Paul Ryan on Capitol Hill. He has nothing but accolades for the way the spineless Speaker, Mike Johnson, has been helping the radical Marxist agenda of Joe Biden, as the Marxist Dems mean to burn America to the ground and rebuild a totalitarian dictatorship on the ashes. Paul Ryan telling Axios that, quote, Johnson found his footing and his voice. He did it as a statesman, risking his own personal political fortune for the greater good that he believes in. If I may, I'd like to just stop right there for a moment and suggest to you that if he considers that selflessness, what he did was sell out to the Democrats so that he could remain as Speaker. That is hardly being selfless. It is hardly being a statesman. Just look what was just done with Ukraine, what was done with warrantless wiretaps that under Johnson became, well, you don't need to bother with those silly warrants. Just go ahead and spy on the American people, said Mike Johnson. Well, Paul Ryan loves a speaker who knows the establishment is in charge and not the people, or even the people's representatives. And the establishment wants those illegal aliens made right at home here in America. Instead of deporting these millions of foreigners, including Chinese nationals, Middle East terrorists, and Mexican cartel members, and the rest of them, Biden is now considering giving a, quote, backdoor amnesty to millions of illegal aliens who've broken into the country and, in some cases, married an American. And joining us now to discuss this mixed status couples amnesty is the Texas Land Commissioner, Dr. Dawn Buckingham. She is the Land Commissioner of the great state of Texas, as I said. Dr. Buckingham, great to have you with us. Right now, we're looking at potential amnesty, various forms of amnesty, but in this most recent, a little over 1 million illegal aliens would receive Biden amnesty, as if he had that power. Your reaction to these proposals for amnesty and what is clearly the puppet master's continued giveaway to illegal aliens, the Mexican drug cartel. Your thoughts?
Lou, it's always good to be on with you. Hello to you and all of your audience. You know, this is just a preposterous, contemplation by the Biden administration. How about we help out all the people who came here legally, who are standing behind these millions of folks who came here illegally? And how about this? There are consequences to your direct action. If you came here illegally, there's a process for you to go back to your home, be there a year, and then come back and legally enter the country. Why don't we just follow the rule of law and help out the people who are, again, doing it the right way?
Well, your question is readily answered. It's because Joe Biden is in the Oval Office and has, through his own dictatorial powers, insisted that the border be turned over to the Mexican drug cartels and that illegal aliens by the millions be invited into the United States. And we right now have brought in, under this Biden illegitimate administration, something approaching 15 million illegal aliens in the long 3 years that he has been in the Oval Office. Is there a solution here? What is the state of Texas going to do? And how in the world are we going to contend with this illegitimate government of ours?
Well, again, you're absolutely right. It's just amazing to me. And I always remind everybody when we talk about the number of illegal immigrants, that's just what Border Patrol has set eyes on or hands on or seen. That is not what I estimate 20 to 50 million, 20 to 50 people per individual that Border Patrol actually touches and counts. They're skirting around the edges. They go through the empty spaces when they send the folks through that occupy all the agents. We are literally being invaded. And this is on the doorstep of one of the FBI leaders saying he has great concerns over an upcoming potential coordinated attack on our shores. How many people from the terrorist most wanted list do we need to have come across before we're learning how many of the folks that we see across the country molesting small children, killing women, creating all the problems that they're creating in our big cities like New York City? We need complete operational control of our border, follow the rule of law. That is what is going to keep our communities and our children safe.
You know, it occurs to me that the very simplest direct answer to all of this is every state, with the exception of Texas, has been asleep on the border, and every other state in the union has not insisted that this madness stop. Everyone's afraid to raise their hands and say Joe Biden is crazy as he can possibly be. This man is batty, and he is also the puppet of Marxist Dems masters who are in the shadows guiding everything that is happening, whether it's a disastrous foreign policy. And by the way, the border is a disastrous foreign policy on top of everything else, or whatever the crime rate in this country, runaway inflation, and everybody is, including the Republicans. The Republicans, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is walking around as if he was the most brilliant statesman in history, rather than the biggest sellout in the Republican Party's history. What is going on, and can we get through to November 5th to assure that we have a real leader in the White House?
You know, I wish I could tell you exactly what's going on, because I completely agree with you. When you look at Joe Biden, he can't even finish a sentence. He talks about his relative being eaten by cannibals somewhere in India during a war that is completely ludicrous. He just stands up and does the most crazy things and shows that he's just not mentally competent to be running the country, which is why we should really worry about the deep state and who is actually running the country. It's also why I'm amazed, as you are, that the Republicans are not standing up and ringing the bell, banging the drums, really trying to appeal to non-traditional Republican voters to point out the truths, because Lord knows they're not seeing them any other way if we're not speaking them. And November
I
can't
think
get
that the
here fast
Republicans
enough.
somehow, Don, I think the Republicans, the Rhino establishment Republicans, frankly, they're just they might as well pay their dues to the Democrat Party, because they're not certainly Republicans. Don, we thank you for being with us. It's always good talking with you, and come back soon, Dr. Don Buckingham. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lou. God bless.
And now we're pivoting from one outrage to the next, and this should frighten all Americans. If you think that COVID was in the rearview mirror, you're now in for a rude awakening. It was apparently only a test run, according to some. Joe Biden is now considering declaring a national climate emergency in which he will be able to give himself COVID-like powers without congressional approval. This is what Mark Molinaro had to say about the alarming prospect of a desperate President Biden turning to climate fascism to cling to power.
NBC News has reported that if Joe Biden declares a national climate emergency, he would have COVID-like powers under that emergency, and they also compared the emergency powers to the 9/11 emergency powers. The Center for Biological Diversity has estimated Joe Biden would get about 130 wartime-like powers by which to bypass democracy and impose the Green New Deal on America without a single vote of Congress. This is truly this is a Halloween story, not a story for Earth Day. This is a truly frightening story, and he might just be desperate enough to do it. This is being widely reported in the media. The Biden White House is leaking this out. This might happen, and this is going to give Joe Biden, these kind of, you want to say the word dictatorial powers. He doesn't need no stinking democracy to impose the Green New Deal if he does this.
Well, President Biden is apparently on the verge of seizing dictatorial powers in more ways than one. Under the auspices of declaring an emergency, we've seen the autocratic totalitarian playbook on this, and no one should be surprised if indeed he decides to do it. Coming up here next, a group of prominent Trump-hating media commentators meeting weekly for 2 years as they strategize on how to bring down Trump. These weak-minded weaks, they're a bunch of beauties, this group. We will expose them when we come right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. A group of prominent Trump-hating media commentators. Now think about that one. A group of prominent Trump-hating media commentators. Well, they've been meeting weekly for 2 years. And the reason? They're trying to figure out how to bring down President Trump. It's incredible. The members include Lawrence Tribe, a Harvard law professor, he's a Marxist to the bone, and George Conway, a co-founder of the anti-Trump Lincoln Project, and just basically a public nuisance. It also features Norman Eisen, a former Obama lieutenant who wrote the playbook on those color revolutions that were used to effect regime change overseas. And I have a feeling he's been involved in a little politics here in this country, if you know what I mean. If you want to know what that looks like in practice, see the Black Lives Matter riots that preceded the 2020 election. Look at the Summer of Love, the riots, the arson, the murders, the violence that consumed the country right up until October. It's amazing how that worked back in 2020. And the influence of this group is far-reaching. In 2022, they were briefed by January 6 committee staffers. These Trump haters weren't affiliated with the investigation. They had no official standing, but they sure did have connections to the Marxist Dems. But they are apparently important enough to command the attention of the architects of President Trump's persecution. Last May, they were joined by E. Jean Carroll's lawyer. They talked about strategy after Carroll won her first defamation case against President Trump. Kaplan spent half an hour discussing the tactics she used to defeat Trump in court. We've heard for years from fact checkers that there's no media conspiracy against Trump, but we've known all along that that just simply was a lie, like all the other lies that leave the lips of Marxist Dems. That conspiracy meets by Zoom every Friday if you're interested. And joining us now, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Joe DeGenova. Joe has steadfastly defended Trump from the weaponization of the legal system. We're happy to have him with us as always here tonight. And Joe, good to see you, my friend.
Great to be
Let's
back.
start. Let's start with just where we are right now. We've got a group of commentators. It's reminiscent of the Obama talking points. If you remember when all of the crushing corporate media convened in the mornings to share talking points and a unified approach to crushing Donald Trump. Your thoughts?
Well, I think what's fascinating about this group that got together to destroy Trump and has been meeting regularly is that they've done so with a clear mindedness that's really quite frightening, and with the complicity of the mainstream media. A group of people who, for example, like Lawrence Tribe, who always wanted to be on the Supreme Court but never quite made it. Jeffrey Toobin, the disgraced former legal commentator on CNN. One of them is J. Michael Ludwig, who was a former judge, federal judge on the Fourth Circuit, and his claim to fame is when George W. Bush picked Sam Alito to go to the Supreme Court. Ludwig told the president that he wasn't interested in going on the Supreme Court anymore, and because he wanted to be Chief Justice. And George W. said, "Well, we can't make you Chief Justice, but if you wait around, I'm sure there'll be a spot." And Ludwig said, "No, I'm going to resign from the Fourth Circuit," which is what he's done. And he's been a bad commentator ever since. This is how these people function. Their lives are lives of loss, desperation. And so they've decided they're going to try and destroy Donald Trump, just like they've destroyed themselves.
Well, it is that much hate has to be self-destructive. But right now, we're in the midst of such a vast sea of hate on the part of the Marxist Dems, the left in this country. Everyone seems to be as petty and venomous and venal as any one of the people that we just talked about. More so in most cases. We're looking at a Supreme Court that right now has the opportunity to step in and for whether it is from courtrooms in New York City, where there is nothing but corrupt partisanship on display and hateful at that on display. And the Supreme Court has a chance to shut this down because there has never been a clear statement of what official lawfare is, what political persecution is in this country than what we're witnessing in courtroom after courtroom, which they're going after Donald Trump in every way possible. Do you think the Supreme Court has both the character and the responsibility to stop what is political persecution and obviously corrupt judiciaries in so many states, including the District of Columbia?
I think it does. And I think one of the reasons is notwithstanding the ideological and political differences of the members of the court, we've seen most recently in the Colorado case where the court unanimously ruled that states could not exclude a presidential candidate from their ballots in their states, that if a person meets all the qualifications in the Constitution, they must be on the ballot. That was a 9-0 decision, which I think surprised a lot of people. They also have an opportunity to do what you would like, Lou, in the case that's going to be argued that involves presidential immunity. Donald Trump is going to win that case. He's going to get a ruling that says there is presidential immunity, and the court is going to send it back to the district court for further hearings to do fact-finding to determine which acts that are named in the indictment were official acts and which were not, and whether or not the indictment can stand. But they are going to find that after ruling in 1982 that presidents have absolute immunity from civil suits before, during, and after their presidency, they're going to rule the same thing happens in criminal cases, but there have to be certain limitations because of the nature of the criminal law. And that means a win for Trump because there'll be hearings and the federal cases will never go to trial before the election.
Well, the other part of that is there's no greater demonstrations. It's as if the Marxists in this country all convened and said, how could we make the best case for unlimited immunity for a president of the United States?
Yes.
because they have gone after him, state courts, local courts, federal courts, special special counsels, these ignorant district attorneys, every one of them compromised and seemingly utterly incompetent. We've seen the Justice Department under Biden and Merrick Garland ship Colangelo off, the #3 guy in the Justice Department, to sit down in Manhattan and go after one guy, Donald Trump. The ignorance is overwhelming. The venality is repugnant. It is revulsive. It is a sickening moment for, I would think, anyone in the legal profession who has any character, any principle at all. And I know that eliminates most of those folks who are operating right now as within the Democratic Party.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Lou. And one thing that they're not counting on, and that is that the members of the Supreme Court are just like you and me. They see what's going on. They're not immune to that. And no matter what their political beliefs are or ideology, what they see going on against this president is going to be worrisome to them as keepers of the flame, because John Roberts has done a good job in this sense of making all of them institutionalists. We saw that in the Colorado ruling. That was a wonderful victory for democracy, for the rule of law. And what's happening to President Trump is going to be recognized by these judges. And they're going to pick up on what you just said. You just said, look at what people do when they're given the power and how they're showing why it is absolutely important that presidents have some form of immunity from criminal prosecution. Otherwise, we're going to see a series of presidents who are attacked by the opposition party when they leave office, when that opposition party takes over the White House and the Justice Department. I think the Supreme Court is going to embarrass the Democrats in a very big way by finding that there is presidential immunity. And it's going to throw a wrench into all these cases. Even the state cases are going to be affected by this, even though the federal courts don't have jurisdiction over criminal prosecutions. The courts of appeals in those states are going to be very aware of the reason that the Supreme Court is going to find presidential immunity.
And to your point, a decision that provided, in effect, I would hope, basically absolute immunity from civil and criminal prosecution as presidents. If they did that, wouldn't that override anyone who in a local or state government who wanted to go after him with an indictment?
Well, it's a very interesting question, Lou. It's never been asked before, and it's never been answered by the Supreme Court. In 1982, the Supreme Court ruled that presidents couldn't be sued for civil actions before, during, and after office. If they were to find immunity, even if it wasn't absolute, but that it had to cover all acts that were committed during the time they were president in office, as long as they weren't in certain acts like murder or killing somebody in the White House, because they're not going to exempt that. But if they find that, it could very well affect all the state prosecutions as well. It's going to determine on how the Supreme Court answers its own question about whether or not there is such immunity. And there's just no doubt the Supreme Court is going to find there is immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts of the president, committed acts done while in office.
Right. You know, as you were talking, I'm thinking that this is such an important week in terms of our politics, in terms of the integrity of our elections, in terms of the integrity of our courts. It seems to me the Supreme Court has an immense responsibility here that goes beyond simply the integrity of the judiciary, although that's critical, without question. But the country is in such bad shape. Anything less than the strongest statement that it will not accept lawfare and will not accept official political persecution, political viciousness and venality on the part of those who would like to stop a president, either as a candidate or as president. I mean, it seems to me they have to act, and it will be a noble act so long as they fulfill that responsibility. Your thoughts as we wrap up.
I think they're going to. I actually think they're going to. And we got a hint from that the other day during the oral argument on the obstruction case in the Supreme Court over the January 6th defendants, when Justice Gorsuch asked the Solicitor General, well, suppose I'm a member of Congress and I throw a fire alarm switch in the middle of a vote. Is that obstructing justice? Is that obstructing an official proceeding? Now, it seemed to me when Justice Gorsuch embarrassed Bowman, Congressman Jamal Bowman, by naming him in a Supreme Court argument, that the court is very much aware of lawfare and what's going on in the political process and in the legal process in this country. And I think you've hit on it, Lou. I think the court is very aware it has to send a signal that the legal process must remain sacrosanct.
Well, the saying goes, from your lips to God's ears. Thanks so much. Joe DeGenevieve, we thank you so much. Great to see you, my friend. Turning now to Marxist Dem New York Mayor Eric Adams. Adams was confronted on an aircraft by an enraged pro-Palestine protester. Watch what happened.
So you're Eric Adams? Yeah. You support the genocide in Palestine. There are homeless people all over New York. You're always partying. You don't actually care about the citizens of New York. Why are you even in Miami? You know there are people being arrested there. People are homeless in New York. People cannot afford food. You keep cutting the education budget so you can fund the police. That's all you care about, funding the police. Everything is underfunded because of you. You're trying to get the...
Well, there it is. Democracy in action. Honestly, that irate flyer got one thing right. Adams doesn't care about the citizens of New York. We can all agree on that. Meanwhile, Democrat Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs has killed a bill to help Arizona homeowners fight those squatters. If it had been passed, homeowners would be able to immediately have law enforcement remove those invaders on their property, those squatters. But Hobbs vetoed the legislation. And her reasoning, Hobbs said that the bill could have, quote, unintended consequences for victims of domestic violence, end quote. That is illogical. No one knows what in the world she means, and Hobbs didn't elaborate. She couldn't, if she tried, by the way. Her veto is simply indefensible, and the people of Arizona, if they're going to put up with this, just remember, you apparently voted for them. Oh, wait a minute. There might be some possibility that the Arizona electoral system is just as rigged as any. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, I should point out something about Hobbs. She has already vetoed more bills than any governor in Arizona history, and it's only 15 months into her term in office. Well, in Tennessee, lawmakers successfully passing a measure that allows school staff to carry concealed handguns on campus. In fact, it's encouraged. The bill is on its way to the desk of Governor Bill Lee. If he signs it, it will be a big win for school safety and for the responsibility of teachers for the children they teach. Now I'd like to tell you about some amazing savings from MyPillow. I'm excited to tell you about MyPillow's huge spring sale. There are a few examples, more than a few really, but here we go. Buy one MyPillow 2.0 and get another absolutely free. The pillows are made with cooling technology, and that means the best pillow is now even better. And a new price for Percale bed sheets, 9 brand new colors and styles of the Percale's bed sheets, and they're made with the finest long staple cotton, and you can save now 50% or more. That's as low as $24.98 a set. And are you ready? For the first time this year, the My Slippers and Sandals are selling for $25 a pair. I love MyPillow slippers. So does my wife. She loves her slippers, and they're great. And I love mine. And at any price, they're a bargain. But for $25 a pair, you win, and you win big. So go to MyPillow.com. Use promo code Dobbs, that's Dobbs, or call 800-977-9152 to get the MyPillow 2.0 buy one, get one free. or the percale sheets for as low as $24.98, and my slippers and sandals for as low as $25 a pair. Are you kidding me? These are high quality products and great prices. And when you order $75 or more, your entire order ships absolutely free. So go to mypillow.com, use promo code Dobbs. Wow, promo code Dobbs. It'll be a lot of fun to use that. It has a ring to it, doesn't it? Promo code Dobbs. Well, join us for my podcast as well. The Great America Show, available at loudobbs.com. Wherever you get your podcast, we're coming right back. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. Pro-Hamas, terrorist-supporting radical demonstrators bringing America's once prestigious universities to their knees. And at least 133 students have been arrested at Columbia University in violent clashes, including clashes with police that led to the SWAT team being called in. In at least a dozen instances, faculty members were arrested in the midst of the clash, and their militant encampment was packed up. But now Columbia University is closing down in-person classes for the semester. In other words, the demonstrators have won. They're shutting down Columbia University for the rest of the school year, declaring that the Ivy League university will just go to remote learning. And by the way, for all of you who don't know, Columbia costs $70,000 a year, and they're going to be doing it now digitally, remotely. Amazing. Conservative activist Laura Loomer was on the scene to prove indisputably that many of these protesters are in fact direct supporters of the terrorist group Hamas. Here she is. As you see, quite a demonstration and quite a sickening display of anti-Semitism, anti-Israeli ignorance. It is unbelievable. A pro-Hamas mob rallied outside the Jewish Senate Majority Leader's home. Chuck Schumer trying to maintain his security and safety. The demonstrators trying to pressure him into cutting off aid from Israel. Well, Schumer didn't have much to say about the pro-Hamas mob that gathered outside his home. Here he is.
Look, I put out a statement about Columbia. Peaceful protest is proper and appropriate, and I've always had 4 goals in terms of Israel policy. 1, radically reduce the presence of Hamas. You can't have peace with Hamas. Free the hostages, get as much humanitarian aid possible as done, and do everything you can to avoid civilian casualties.
Schumer forgot one. He also is the guy who wanted Benjamin Netanyahu in the midst of war to call for elections. He didn't mention that. Amazing. Well, if these were MAGA protesters, Schumer would have called it an insurrection and had them thrown in the gulag, just as he did with January 6th demonstrators. That's how evil the Marxist Dems are. That's how evil Schumer is. So amid all of this upheaval and civil disorder caused by far-left extremists, FBI Director Christopher Wray had the temerity to make the following statement in an interview with NBC Nightly News.
There's an environment right now we're seeing play out on some college campuses, the protests over what's happening in Gaza. Are you watching that warily? Are you concerned about threats emanating from these demonstrations?
Well, of course, demonstrations themselves are not something that we, the FBI, get involved in. But when violence ensues, that's when we get concerned, when you have threats of violence.
Threats of violence. What would he call from the river to the sea? Wouldn't that be a threat of violence? Wouldn't all of these pro-Hamas demonstrations be threats of violence? Is Christopher Wray vaguely even rational? Does he really pay attention to anything, or does he deflect and demur all of the time? Well, joining us now to talk about the pro-Hamas takeover of many of our universities is former defense official Mark Vargas. And Mark, great to have you with us. What were your thoughts as you heard that Ray say that he watches those threats of violence? Apparently, he wasn't watching a single one of those protests in the New York area. What are your thoughts?
Well, Lou, what this is demonstrating is really how far off the rails the Democratic Party has gone. I can't tell you how many people that I've talked to that are leaving the Democratic Party, and this is one of those issues that they could have never imagined in their lifetime, that they would run away from one of our strongest allies, Israel. We shouldn't be surprised, Lou, because at one point a few years ago, the same Democratic administration, Biden administration, was calling parents domestic terrorists. It's outrageous. Nobody is being held accountable for these actions. And what the Democrats seem to forget is that on October 7th, over 1,200 innocent men, women, and children were slaughtered, lost their lives, the biggest mass casualty event since the Holocaust. That seems to be forgotten. And in belief, First Amendment does have limits. And when you're on American soil saying death to America, I'm here in Chicago, death to America, death to Israel, and you're being and protesters are being taught that in Farsi, I think it's completely outrageous, unacceptable, and vile. And we need to hold people accountable.
Well, let's start with Chris Wray, because as you said, this business of declaring domestic terrorists because parents show up and they raise their voice in a school board meeting, and suddenly they're domestic terrorists. But we're watching the ignorance, the calls for genocide of Israeli citizens, and he is still not going to pay attention. This is the kind of ignorance at the deep state level, that is under the control, obviously, of the Marxist Dems and this puppet regime. This is unacceptable on every level. But we don't hear the Republican Party saying that, do we?
We do not. And I had hoped that FBI Director Wray would have gone a step further, and he did not. But this comes as no surprise, because he's being influenced certainly by the deep state, number one, and number two, by the Biden administration. And just look at the Democratic leaders. You've got, not only does Senator Schumer, who is Jewish, is he sort of treading very lightly, but you've got the President of the United States who's calling for an election, or you've got Democratic leaders calling for an election to remove Netanyahu. It is absolutely outrageous, and it is why we're seeing this violence escalate, not only on campuses, but in cities and communities across the street. Just 2 weeks ago, Lou, these anti-American, anti-Israel protesters blocked one of the main highways in Chicago, blocking traffic to the airport. There were images of people walking on the side of the street with their suitcases. Nobody was held accountable. Until they are, this rhetoric and this violence will only continue.
Until they are held accountable. It's interesting because Chuck Schumer is the third most powerful Jew in the entire U.S. government. And he is the one who raised his voice first to call for elections on the part of Netanyahu during the October massacre, the October 7th massacre. This is just appalling. And then the next thing he's talking with, a very firm and concerned tone, when in point of fact, he's selling out Israel himself.
He is never would have I imagined that I'd be witnessing this transpire in real time, Lou. And it really is, once again, how far the Democratic Party has fallen. Chuck Schumer has a responsibility, a moral and ethical responsibility, a legislative responsibility in his position to be calling this out and holding these violent anti-American protesters accountable. And what they're doing, Lou, is they're setting this up for the Democratic National Convention, which is going to be here in Chicago, to be an absolute mess, because so far they're testing the limits. They're seeing how far they can go, not just on college campuses, but in communities and cities across the country. And the Democrats are allowing them to go a little further, a little bit further, to the point where we're going to be at the point of no return. And I fear for our country. I fear for our citizens. I fear for our Jewish friends as well.
Well, for all Americans, I have to say, this is a dark moment, and we have to understand that. 2020, the Summer of Love, as it was called, those demonstrations that ran from May to October, the violence, the destruction of property, the assaults on government buildings, that was so successful. That this is why we're seeing all of this anti-American driven demonstration and protest across the country. And now they feel so emboldened that they are taking first the totalitarian streak that is an imperative within the Democratic Party to begin with. Now, just public and wide open is their anti-Semitism. This is a real issue for this election this year. Why any American would vote for such ignorance is beyond me. And by the way, when Hillary Clinton wants to talk about KK hoods, that entire party is getting fitted for one right now.
Lou, it goes back to the supposed insurrection where they learned, hey, we can jail the other side, and they did. And then they realized, well, if we can jail them, let's push the limit. And they did. And they realized no consequences, nobody held accountable. And we're seeing an escalation since 2020 of these activities in 2022, now in 2024. Again, we need to hold people accountable. And it is my hope that the average American, whether you're Republican, Democrat, independent, whether you vote or you don't vote, the average American is now waking up and seeing the side of violence. And that's why I've said this so many times before. This is an election of ideologies. This is an election of good versus evil.
Yeah, and no question about it. Mark, thanks so much. Mark Vargas, appreciate you being with us. Coming up next, Joe Biden's war on women rages on. So does his war on Christians and Jews. He has quite a few wars raging right now. The Biden regime proudly abolishing Title IX, a real war on women that will allow men in women's locker rooms and other outrages. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Joe Biden is accelerating his war against women and sanity. Last Friday, Biden's administration announced that it would extend Title IX to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. In layman's terms, that means that Joe Biden just killed Title IX. It means women will be forced to share locker rooms with trans-identified males. Women will also be forced to compete against men. With all their biological advantages, say goodbye to women's sports and athletics. The Biden administration claims to be doing this in order to protect trans students, was the term he used, but that's utter nonsense. Democrats, the Marxist Dems, love to tell others to follow the science, but they rarely do so themselves. In February, a long-term study found that most children grow out of their gender confusion. In March, a Mayo Clinic study determined that puberty blockers can lead to permanent fertility issues and even cancer in children who use them to transition. Biden isn't protecting women or children. He is damning them by writing madness into law, and that is a cold, hard fact. And joining us now to discuss this is Heritage Foundation Senior Legal Fellow, Sarah Parshall-Perry. And Sarah, great to have you here. I would have to think that this is just to you appalling, the decision by the Biden administration to effectively destroy Title IX.
Oh, absolutely. Not only as a woman, and not only as a mother, not only as a former athlete, but as former senior counsel for civil rights at the Department of Education, who was tasked with enforcing, among other laws, Title IX. And the expansion of sex to include sexual orientation and gender identity is not only not supported by the text of the law, just simply one sentence prohibiting sex discrimination. It's also not supported by the congressional record of extensive debate. It's not supported by the amendment in 1987, and it's never been supported by any other federal court to interpret this actual provision to include gender identity. That hasn't prevented the Biden administration and subsequent federal courts from deciding to be activist with a very plain, cut and dry law that has been around and provided women's equality in education for more than 50 years.
It's amazing. And there was a time, and some of us remember when that time very well, when women did not have equal participation in athletics in schools and universities and colleges in particular. But this is particularly onerous to think that some bureaucrat in the Department of Education, with the stroke of the pen, has destroyed Title IX. No elected official involved. There is no approval or by the Congress of the United States. There have been, as I heard the Secretary of Education bragging about, there had been something like 400,000 responses to the call for comment. This is a country of 360 million people. And to brag about 400,000 comments is sickeningly stupid. There isn't much about this that's rational, is there?
No, not in the least. And in fact, when the Civil Rights Act reauthorized Title IX in 1987, there was no record of congressional debate to expand the definition of sex to include sexual orientation or gender identity. We don't want executive agencies pulling interpretations of federal law out of thin air. They are only tasked with, under the Administrative Procedure Act, interpreting ambiguous provisions or making determinations on how best to enforce said rules. No one at any point prior to this administration have ever interpreted Title IX to include gender identity. But what's more, Lou, is that this also includes pregnancy and related conditions, including the termination of pregnancy. So yes, abortion. In addition to its other parade of horribles, this particular rule also sets the framework for abortion as a civil right and provides access in both K through 12 and college and university environments to both abortion counseling and perhaps a taxpayer dollar abortion services also.
And you think about this, the Department of Education, the Congress of the United States, the Senate, none of them have held hearings on these issues. The impact of what is effectively genital mutilation, it is mutilation of young people, no matter how you want to describe it. It is sanctioned by the AMA through its acquiescence and its silence. It is sanctioned by the Bar Association because they have not raised even a moment's question. We are looking at the Congress of the United States, and this has become, in political and ideological terms, it's becoming a fourth rail of politics. It's outrageous what we're doing without benefit of science, without benefit of hearings, without benefit of public knowledge. And in fact, it's an effort by this administration and through their acquiescence, again, the Republicans have had nothing to say on this. How in the world do you get to this point in our society and have the public's right to know honored by just an escalating level of ignorance about the subject?
Yeah, I have to tell you, this was a whole of government approach beginning on day one of his first day in office, January 20th of 2021. The first executive order this president issued was a direction to all of his executive agencies to expand the definition of sex discrimination to include discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Well, you can see the impact from that trickle-down analysis through everything from HUD to HHS to Department of Education to DOJ and for this administration. I believe Title IX was very much their brass ring. It is the preeminent sex equality piece of legislation that we enjoy here in the country. It was the crowning achievement of the women's liberation movement. Of course, now we see relative silence on the part of some of those arch feminists, and we find that it's mostly a few feminists, but in large part conservatives, who are now saying, wait a minute, you told us to follow the science. We can recognize scientifically, biologically, men and women are different. And the distinctions, the physiological advantages between men and women, specifically so in athletics, are myriad. So it really does take a lot of gall for this administration to say that it's settled, when in fact, Lou, as you mentioned, we've just seen 2 studies out of Europe, one out of England, one out of the Netherlands, both of which say not only is this gender affirming care not helpful, it is actually damaging, and most of these children, if left alone, will eventually make peace with their biological sex anyway.
And to that point, also, the American Psychiatric Association has not held a single hearing. There aren't studies from what should be a highly engaged mental health caregivers and physicians. It's interesting, this refusal to hit what is a fourth rail of politics. They're scared to death. It's absolutely frightening to think what this country has come to. When we start arguing about what is a man and what is a woman, we should know that it's time for all of us to take pause and start understanding what is going on. And that means seeking a full engagement, a full conversation in this country on this very important issue, because we're watching suicides rise for many of these children who have grown up as transitioned adults, and the results are not pretty. I mean, we're talking about suicides rising. We're a host of mental health issues. It is appalling. Sarah, we thank you for being with us. I hope you'll come back and take up this subject with us as we proceed in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you so much for being here today. Sarah Parshall-Perry, thank you. And we thank you for being with us tonight. And before we go, I want all of you to know about what I think is the amazing quality of MyPillow products, all of them, especially the items that I myself have enjoyed over the years. I say myself and my wife as well. We love MyPillow products. My wife and I love the Giza sheets. We love our MyPillow slippers. And I'm telling you, you can't beat the comfort of these slippers at any price. And I won't go into the dog beds and everything else, but the dogs love them. And MyPillow products are high quality. They're amazing quality, amazing low prices. And MyPillow has hundreds of products, and you need to know about all of them. And to get the word out, Mike is throwing this $25 extravaganza. Here are just a few of the deals waiting for you. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. Their 6-pack towel sets, $25. Brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. And for the first time ever, premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size, just $25. This amazing offer won't last long, so order now. Just go to mypillow.com or call 800-977-9152. Use promo code Dobbs. Dobbs has a ring to it, doesn't it? And join us on my podcast as well, The Great America Show, available at loudobbs.com, wherever you get your podcast. And thank you for being with us this evening. Please join us tomorrow, 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 Central. And if you think Mike's products are great, wait until you see Mike's show right after ours. You're in for a real treat. Thank you, and we hope you have a great evening. God bless you as well.
Hi, I'm Kevin Sorbo. Now, many of you remember me as Hercules,